The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the Our Culture, Our Stories podcast are those of the individual hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policies or positions of the NAACP or any affiliated organizations.
The way that some people romanticize going back to the homeland of the African continent, I believe that magic is in the South. And if we go back and return forward and are not afraid to love on the ancestors who bled into that soil, who sweat into that soil, who dreamed under that night sky, like literally thinking of what it took for a Harriet Tubman to be born in the South and dream big enough to free herself and hundreds of other people without any of the technology that we have. How could I believe, how could you, little girl, believe that you don't have something to offer with all of the tools at your disposal? You deserve to take up space there and for it to be beautiful.
So tell us a little bit about Brea, the little girl. You ended up graduating from Yale,
Mm-hmm.
which is obviously nothing to sneeze at, but talk to us about little Brea and how you got here. What's that journey been like?
Yeah, oof. I mean, you started with Yale, so I got a quote W.E.B. Du Bois, who was saying about Harvard that the credit was all theirs. And I firmly believe that the little girl Brea had looked at these institutions like Yale and dreamed of being one of the people who could sort of shatter the ceilings and make it into those spaces and thrive in those spaces. And then you get older and you realize that sometimes the spaces are not all they're cracked up to be, and that I had been trying so hard to get approval in a sense of what white people would see as valid. But I watched my sisters who both went to HBCUs, and I yearned for an experience a lot closer to theirs, something that was a lot more affirming, that allowed Black students to grapple with Black thought in a classroom without our issues being made debates, and white authors and topics are the classics, right? Like I wanted to be in a space where I could see myself on the page. And a lot of that I do think did happen because of Yale. So I don't regret it fully. I think that I ended up there at a really critical point in time where I was a young Black girl who was being told that the world is my oyster, who was being told that we're in a post-racial America. Obama is our president. But I started Yale the year that Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman. And the year that I was a first year at Yale was the year that George Zimmerman was on trial. And my first summer in between freshman and sophomore year was the summer that George Zimmerman was acquitted. And so all of those different moments really peeled back the veil on what I thought I was doing. So I entered Yale a physics major thinking I was going to be whatever Black excellence looked in that traditional sense. And this is no tea or shade to those who ended up in the STEM fields. But I just think that for me, in that moment, I felt like I could not be in a lab. I could not be sitting in a classroom being told that I had to be unbiased. I needed desperately to be off of the sidelines. And that's where activism and community organizing and ultimately writing led me.
Did you ever imagine your life taking this trajectory, though?
No,
When did that?
not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, when I switched
Yeah.
majors, I entered Yale pre-med because I also grew up in a community where, the same few jobs are pushed towards you. Be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or an entertainer, or an athlete. Like it's a same kind of bucket. So when I switched to political science, I remember my mother Googling it and coming back to me and being like, okay, so you could be the Secretary of State? Like, I don't really know. What do you do with that degree? And I was like, to be honest, I don't know either, Ma. I just feel pulled to be doing something and to be wrestling with things in a different way, to understand how do we get here in at the time, which was the year 2013, in the year 2013, where this is still racial justice in America. We still have not achieved that. And now we're in 2024 and we're still asking that question. And I think I have a better understanding of that why. But back then I was just trying to find answers and I didn't know what that would look like as a career. I did a wide variety of internships and worked at various nonprofits and kind of slipped and fell into the career that I have now. But passion was kind of what was my fuel and North Star.
Can you speak to the importance of education within advocacy? So, do you believe literature and knowledge can be an act of resistance? And if so, how?
Books and literature are definitely acts of resistance. I firmly believe that I would not have been radicalized in the way that I have around race and class and gender and sexuality had it not been for the way that writers put to words what I was thinking and unsure of. And I think that's really important. And people gloss over that step of activism. People think that you see something one day, you get angry, and the next day you're an activist. But the real activists, the real organizers, are those who are wise enough to say, the thing that I'm seeing out in the world that I dislike, I am probably also replicating that in my own actions and my own thoughts. That if I'm saying that this is a racist society, how do I think that I would be immune to that? There has to be something that I've internalized, that I'm doing, that is also keeping this racist society going. And if I don't read enough books and sit with that long enough to truly understand my place in the fight, my activism only exists through pointing my finger at other people. And for me, the activists that I have learned the most from, people like Angela Davis, James Baldwin, Nikki Giovanni, who we just lost, Harry Belafonte, these are people who are willing to sit with themselves and say, where can I grow? Where can I go differently? Even the luminaries like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, you read their autobiographical works and they talk a lot about the journeys they went on. That Malcolm X incarcerated was a very different Malcolm X on his Mecca journey, and that there had to be so much learning and unlearning that happened in between there for him to be able to have anything to offer anybody else. And so I think that's really important, but also that in a world that is not teaching our history in full and with full honesty in a classroom, that there are books that someone can buy and access and teach themselves, and that also matters. And that is a acting as a fugitive to the way things are, is by saying, you're trying to rewrite that history. I won't let it happen on my watch. I am insisting that the narrative includes what I have to say, that the archive includes the voices of my people and my community. And we have to be able to do that, or else you'll look back in time and think, oh, Americans just all went in line with the Make America Great Again image. Americans just waved at fascism as it. No, Americans stood watch, specifically Black Americans. And our works that we write down will be a testament of that and allow the stories to continue on.
What are some of the other causes that you advocate for?
There are so many causes that I advocate for. I was obviously first impassioned by the Black Lives Matter movement against police brutality and prison violence. But when you really care about an issue and not just for what the media cycle gives you, you start to care about a lot more. And so my journey was that I started going to protests for Black boys and men who had been killed or harmed by the criminal legal system. But then I had to realize that there were Black women who look just like me, who look like my mother, who have darker skin than me, who are also impacted by that same criminal legal system, and also by medical racism, and also by the school to prison pipeline. And so now I got to care about education reform. And then, oh, by the way, I'm a queer Black woman. So I have to care about the intersection of race and gender and sexuality. And the fact that there have been queer Black women like me who have been championing those issues since the civil rights movement and have been told to wait their turn. And how do I make sure that my community sees that there can be no justice for any of us without justice for all of us? And then that fight, so it kept spinning and spinning. But I will say a recent fight that I really been feeling more pulled towards. It always felt personal, but now I'm really merging it more with my writing and my activism, is my passion around environmental justice and Black land ownership. And I believe firmly that the key to a safer, cleaner planet, the key to bridging racial wealth gaps, and the key to a true post-racial America all exist on the other side of reparations, on an equitable distribution of land. So that's something that I recently wrote a book about, my debut, and it's a story that is very connected to family for me.
Speaking of family, let's talk about your family a little bit. What is your family like, and is your family part of the motivation and the reason that you're in this work?
My family is definitely a huge motivator for me and a driver of why I do what I do. Most of the fights that I fight are because selfishly I want the world to be safer for the people that I love. And unfortunately, we live in a world where society looks at the people that I love and sees criminality and sees aggression and sees people who have less potential or deserve less opportunities. And my job is to make the world look different for my generation, for my mom and her generation, for my grandparents' generation. I'm continuing on a lot of fights that they fought. So for me, that means that I grew up in a Black family that of pastors. My parents are pastors. Both sets of my grandparents are pastors. So we come from that Black church tradition of speaking up about what is not serving us, and about organizing the people around us. My dad's side of the family is from North Carolina, and the first person in my family to own land was my great 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 grandfather Lewis Baker, who bought land just a decade after Emancipation Proclamation was signed. So when I think of what his dreams were, and his wildest dreams being for something to pass on to his children, and a way to control his own means and earnings, and a way to have autonomy after being treated like property. Like, I want to continue that fight. And so, yes, family is so, so deeply the driver of my work, even if they're not all activists and they, I coming in the group chat and they're like, oh no, here she comes. Brea's coming to tell us to be more politically correct or to watch our tone or this or that. But I firmly believe that on the other side of the jokes are people who are proud to see that the tradition of leaving the world better than we received it is something that young Black people still care about. And I come from, my grandfather and his siblings were Black Panthers. We come from that. And so Gen Zers and millennials are not the first ones to wake up and say things should look better. But we are this generation saying things should look better. And we are doing that.
What would you want your legacy to be?
Legacy is such a hard thing to think about, especially as it evolves. But when I imagine my legacy, I imagine something material. I think sometimes with writing, you can't really put your finger on the thing that you changed. Hopefully, you changed people's minds, you broadened their perspective, you made them look into an issue more. But I would like to be able to point to specific pieces of legislation that have been passed or repealed. I would like to look to specific Black families who can say, I have more than I had before Brea wrote that book. Right? I would like to look at someone who says, I didn't dream of being a writer. I didn't know that was possible for me until Brea wrote that article. I would like for someone to say, my child came out and I may have handled that differently until I read Brea's essay about queerness. I want Black people to lead whole, dignified lives. And I want my writing and my organizing to make that more and more possible each day.
Is there a story, a time when you felt violated and that violation only emboldened your work?
Hmm. There are probably so many more important moments, but some of the more trivial ones are just anytime people thought, oh, you couldn't or shouldn't do insert thing. I remember applying to Yale and teachers being like, oh, that might be reaching too high. And it's like a smirk on my face of like, now I have to be the one to show you. But I really do think that I want more Black kids to be able to chase their dreams not out of defiance of someone not believing in them, but it was a fuel for me. And it was something that helped me to realize that not everyone is going to see your vision, and that doesn't mean the vision is not there. And that the life I have is something that not only I didn't see. So I mean, even for all the self-confidence in the world that I had of myself, even this I didn't see for myself. And we are worth that experimentation and that figuring it out. But there are likely so many more moments of me being told no or being discredited or counted out. Um, and the fact that I'm here talking to you for this NAACP Image Awards podcast is all the proof that I need that I landed exactly where I'm supposed to be. This is such an ancestor's wildest dream fulfilled.
Speaking of ancestors, mentors, who have your mentors been in addition to that family that you speak of? Who are Brea Baker's mentors?
Mm. Well, I am so lucky to have started my activism journey at an incredible organization called the Gathering for Justice, which was founded by Harry Belafonte and led by Carmen Perez Jordan. And those two, specifically Carmen Perez, who introduced me to Mr. Belafonte, have been such major mentors for me. Being in intergenerational spaces with them, having their trust and their faith, in being a part of the organization in a big way at a young age was very life changing, because you see someone as iconic as a Mr. Belafonte, who at the time when I met him was in his late 80s, and then you see someone as iconic as a Carmen Perez, who was shutting New York City streets down and doing the things that I talk about, like getting legislation passed and standing up for people who did and didn't look like her. It really showed me that there is work to be done and good work to be done, and that it's not all grueling, but it can be inspiring, it can be beautiful, it can be something that a kid looks up to you with like stars in their eyes, wanting to be that as well. And that idea is something that they both imparted in me just over the last decade, being given opportunity after opportunity to really be who they saw in me before I saw it in myself, is something that, again, it's the experience that Toni Morrison talks about when she said every child deserves to look into an adult's eyes and see them light up, right? And to see like what it means to be adored and cared for and believed in. And that is what Carmen Perez gave me. That is what Mr. Belafonte gave me. And now in his passing, being able to take on the next phase of that organization means the world, to know that from the other side and from this one, that they are both still supporting me. So those are two big, big mentors for me. But there have been countless others. I am such a product of women, and specifically Black women, lifting me up, creating space for me in rooms where I didn't necessarily deserve it or earn it yet. And that is also a priceless experience for me, that encourages me to pass it on as well, to be someone who puts someone else on.
Who would say Brea Baker is my mentor? Who might those people be?
Hmm. What a beautiful question, to think of who feels mentored by me. There are some incredible women who I have gotten to pour into. Hannah Green is a former classmate of mine from Yale. I'm a few years older than her, and so I've gotten to work with her and sow into her writing career and see that blossom and go to new places. There are so many young activists as well who I've gotten to show that there is a way to keep your integrity and be able to pay your bills. And there are so many people who have been taught you either have to be an unpaid martyr or you have to be someone who sells out the movement. And there's something beautiful and in between that says, I deserve to be cared for and to be well compensated. And I don't have to sell my people out or push poison on them to do so. And I feel really grateful for anybody who has read my work and thought I can do something that I didn't think I could do before because of it.
What are your thoughts on the hurt, the anguish that Black women in this country felt early November and still feel as a result of the recent election? What are your thoughts on that, on their pain and
There's a lot of pain that Black people and Black women in particular have been feeling since the 2024 presidential election. And a lot of that pain comes from a very, very valid place. It's the pain of feeling as though you can have twice as much on paper, you can have accomplished three times as much on paper, and it won't always add up. And this country seems insistent upon blocking us from halls of power. I think, though, the pain really stems much beyond that, which is that so many of us live in a country that doesn't see us as a priority. And we had hoped that a Black woman in that seat of power would have finally put us at the center. And I feel I feel for that ache, that desire of like, ah, when us, right? I also think it's important to remember that unfortunately, power is not consolidated in just a presidency. And so even with a Black woman in that office, there are so many ways that we would have been made to feel invalidated, and our priorities not been at the center. Because when we got a Black man in that office, literally, I mean, he was all but told that if he prioritized Black issues, then he was not being America's president. The few times that he empathized with Black Americans from that hall of power, when he said Trayvon could have been my son, America did not want to hear that from him. And that was painful to see our first Black president be told that he had to denounce his pastor. Our first Black president be told he can't empathize with a murdered teenager. Our first Black president have to preside over a country in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement and not be able to give people the substantive policy change they wanted. And I think it's important we remember that. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because I know people want the symbolism to be enough. And we have to fight for more than one person in one hall of power, because ultimately we still would have had less than a handful of Black women in the Senate. We still would have had only one Black woman on the Supreme Court. We still would have had only a handful or dozens of Black judges on the federal circuit courts. There still would have been too little representation. And the fact that America could not give us just that is worth noting, but we have to aspire to more. We have to say, well, what does it mean for us to demand real policy priorities that center us? What is a demand that no matter who is running for office or who is in office, that we don't stop talking about reparations, and that we don't stop talking about justice in our criminal legal system, and we don't stop talking about public safety and true housing and groceries that our people can afford and jobs that are not getting automated away. We have to demand that no matter who is going up, and we cannot succumb to the grief of whatever feelings people are feeling in this moment. Because if we did, again, we would not be having this conversation right now. We are only here because we had ancestors who woke up, saw another day, saw it as just as hard as the one before, and still fought and still pushed and made it more. And you don't always see it in the moment. Sometimes you look back and say, hey, the world looks different than 20 years ago. But you don't see it all the time from October 2024 to November 2024. And then the last thing I'll say on this is it's also important to remember that even if Kamala Harris had been elected the president, we still would have had a country that is giving more money to foreign governments to preside over genocides than to the issues that we are facing in cities like Baltimore, New York, Oakland, Chicago, St. Louis, Atlanta, Houston, and beyond. And so we have to aspire to the more, so that our celebration doesn't come on the necks of someone else's grief.
Thank you. The NAACP. How important is the NAACP to America currently, to the
Mm.
world?
The NAACP has always been and remains incredibly important to the work we're doing here in America for racial justice. And because that work sets precedent for what happens all over the world, the NAACP remains important to the world. And I can say this as someone who is the president of Yale's NAACP chapter, that the youth
Hey,
organizing that happens at college and student-led and youth-led divisions is so critical towards local politics, local rethinking and reimagining, towards making sure that Black studies remains possible on college campuses, that in the face of repealing affirmative action and so many other things, that Black students still have spaces to demand to be seen and demand to be heard. So that always remains important. And the more that our history is banned, the more that our movements are cracked down on, it remains important that the NAACP is a legal defense, is a barrier for those who are writing words like mine. I mean, I write the word reparations so much in my book. I'm like, it might be a Guinness World Record. And that's the kind of book that America does not want on library bookshelves, does not want in prisons or jails, does not want in any public facility. And thankfully, across history, it's been organizations like the NAACP that has defended writers like mine ability to get our work out, defended activists like mine ability to help our campaigns meet people. And so we just have to continue to have that defense and have it be grassroots, even though the NAACP is a large national organization, but allowing those chapters to be the guide and the true steering of the movement, because those closest to the ground and those closest to the problems have always been and will always be closest to the solutions.
In Brea's thought, why do you think there is such a concerted effort to remove Black history from the books, from the bookshelves, and from the history of this country in general, and in your thought?
Mhm. There's such a concerted effort to remove Black history from our shelves, from our curriculums, from our classrooms, and that is in direct response to the impact that studying Black history has. The absence of Black history on a national, because Black people have always maintained Black history. That's what oral history is. That's what family reunions are for. That's what our newspapers have been for. But the circulation of Black history in national mainstream spaces is what has created a lot more equity in our society. So the absence of that history is what allows white complacency to fester. The absence of Black history is what allows white comfort to fester. It's the absence of Black history in these mainstream spaces does what Martin Luther King talked about in allowing the white moderate to be more dangerous than the white racist, in that they have disillusioned themselves to believe that the problem is not nearly as big as it is. And it takes seeing Black history, it takes books like Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow for people to say,
Mm.
hey, I thought that was just this isolated incident over here. You mean to tell me there's a system behind this? The Black history in mainstream spaces does what Monique Norris did with Push Out, and says, hey, you mean there's a school to prison pipeline and Black girls are affected by it too? The presence of Black history does what learning the true history of the Black Panther Party and the Move bombing does, and saying, hey, the FBI has been intentionally a part of keeping our movements from meeting people, and all those movements have ever wanted to do was feed people, house people, keep the police from beating them. Like, when people see that, when you see the truth, you can't unsee it. It
Mm.
as you know, as a child of Black pastors, I have to say, like, it quickens you, right? It something does something to you that says, hey, wait a
Ah,
second, I can't unfeel that anymore. I've now been changed, right? And like, when you have been changed, you have no choice but to change everything and everyone around you. And that is not what the system wants. So every time we see this white lashing to Black studies and Black history, it always comes because there's been a material impact. The moment that Black people started talking about Black Lives Matter movement and having this massive movement around racial justice was also when the March for Our Lives students started saying, hey, well, we're going to talk about gun violence, but we're also going to talk about gun violence with Black and Black communities. And we're also going to talk about police violence. And then you saw all of the white senators and representatives and CEOs say, y'all got my kids at a protest for George Floyd? Because they read what Ijeoma Oluo wrote, and they read what Nicole Hannah Jones wrote, and because they read what Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote, and all of those readings are making my kids rethink their place in society. Oh no, we can't have that. That's where that comes from. So when we see them bucking against us, we have to double down and say, oh, everything they want to ban has to make it far and wide. Any book they don't want us to read, we've got to read it twice as fast and with twice as many people. We got to do teachings about it, book clubs. We got to be in the church basements, in the mosques, in the synagogues. We got to be everywhere our people are talking about these materials and making sure that they continue to get to the non-Black people too.
how important is the NAACP Image Awards in that whole equation that you speak of?
The NAACP Image Awards are essential to giving visibility to the Black authors and musicians and filmmakers who are frankly being shut out and silenced by their respective industries. It is so difficult for a Black person to get a book published, to get a film, documentary, or TV show greenlit, to get their art into the world, and to get that art out to the world without diluting their message. And when we do, it is rare that we make it to the lists where people discover art, right? It's rare that we are celebrated by institutions like the Grammys, the Oscars, the Tonys, the New York Times list, the USA Today list. For those who do make it, amazing, right? Kudos, pinnacle work. But for so many of us, the reason we don't make it is not because our work is any less, but because we are not as supported on the marketing front. And so when it comes to celebrating Black art and making sure that that Black art is championed in front of other audiences of people who care about Black art, the NAACP Image Awards and similar award shows and lists are so our bridge gap. They bridge those gaps and they make it possible for people to say, hey, I didn't hear about that author, I didn't hear about that artist, I didn't realize that Black people were doing country or rock or anything else. But you know who did all along? Black people. And so it takes being celebrated by your own institutions, as Solange would say, to stop caring about what the white institutions have to say. By the time they've caught on, it's like, oh, that's one of our best kept secret. And if you know about them, great. But we have celebrated ourselves so loudly enough that we can't even hear the silence from over there. And that's what these awards show can and should be.
You mentioned the New York Times bestseller. You have been a part of a New York Times bestseller. What does that feel like? Talk a little bit
It is
about that.
so, yeah. You know, I have written for a long time under my own name, but I've also ghostwritten and supported other people's projects as an editor. And through that work, I've gotten to be a part of a New York Times bestseller, which is such a surreal feeling to see a story that deserves to be read, that that uncovers a part of history that more people should learn about, and to see it take space on that list is everything. And to see, especially in a nonfiction section, you know, that we are given leeway and an opportunity to meet readers, and to meet readers who do want to see the society better and need to be presented with an opportunity to learn and unlearn. So it was so rewarding to experience that, and to understand that whenever a Black person sees another Black person meet that list, whether we were a part of it or not, it is, we beam with pride because we know how much it took to make it across that finish line. So it is such a beautiful experience, and I'm excited to feel that even more with future projects.
What do you want the little girl, if you had your choice, what would you want the little girl who's watching you on this podcast? She's in rural America
Mhm.
and she's questioning her existence, her place in life. What would you want her to take away from this interview if you had your choice?
To a little Black girl in rural America who is questioning her place in life and trying to figure out um, just exactly where she fits in, I would hope that my work and that this interview inspire you to remember that you come from a legacy of brilliant, beautiful, interesting Black women who were made as products of the South. And that's a lot of what my journey in writing my book Rooted was all about, was in remembering that yes, the Black Panthers were doing what they were doing in cities. And yes, there are so many, you know, Malcolm X was doing what he was doing in cities, but there are so many activists and writers and musicians and actors and so many other people who got their start in other rural communities in the South. And we would not be in a country that we are in if they did not dare to dream. Like if a John Lewis, right? If an Angela Davis, if these byproducts of the South did not believe that they had something to offer, like Andre 3000 said, the South has something to say, and you are a part of that South little, and you deserve to be heard, you deserve to be seen. And in my book Rooted, I wanted people to understand that the South is where we need to be looking to as Black people, for all the ancestral wisdom that will unlock our freer future. And I really do believe that. I think that the way that some people romanticize going back to the homeland of the African continent, I believe that magic is in the South. And if we go back and return forward and are not afraid to love on the ancestors who bled into that soil, who sweat into that soil, who dreamed under that night sky, like literally thinking of what it took for a Harriet Tubman to be born in the South and dream big enough to free herself and hundreds of other people without any of the technology that we have. How could I believe, how could you, little girl, believe that you don't have something to offer with all of the tools at your disposal? And so that is a big thing that I want so many people to realize is that, as a New Yorker, I have a lot of love for those of us who come from the cities, but my family heritage is from the deep South. And so many of us, that is our story. And the Great Migration may have moved where we currently reside, but that there's a lot of just, you can't even put your finger on it. It's just a je ne sais quoi that's just in the South. And we feel it when we go to Essence Fest in New Orleans. We feel it when we go to Dreamville Fest in Raleigh. We feel it when we're at Pharrell's, something in the Water Fest in Virginia. There's something about being around Black people in the South. And if you are a Black person in the South right now, do not give up on your dream, on your artistry, or on leaving the South better than we received it. Because people are gonna say, "Oh, just let the racists have it." Like, no, we're not giving them an inch. We deserve to take up space everywhere. You should not have to cross a border to live a beautiful, vibrant life. And if you are someone like me who calls Georgia home, or you call Florida, the Carolinas, Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, wherever home, you deserve to take up space there and for it to be beautiful. And I hope that your artistry is something that reveals that to us.
If you were to write a new story, something that you've not done yet, what would that story be and why?
Mm. There are so many stories that I want to write that I haven't yet. Um, One of them is I just want to tell more stories about Black joy and creativity. And rooted is that, I think that people don't think of farmers as creatives, but what it means to be a Black farmer and plant a seed today, on a day that is hard, on a day where you don't think that a lot of people are liking and appreciating what you have to offer, and to water it consistently and wait for it to grow takes imagination, takes patience, takes a discerning ear, right? But I want to tell more stories of Black creativity, of Black people who lived beautiful lives, did beautiful things in spite of the world not always being kind, not always being warm and welcome. And there's so many stories of that. And I think we need those stories more than ever because right now I think there's a lot of Black people looking out at the world and saying, is there anywhere on this continent, on this globe where I can be me and not have to shield a piece of me? And I want us to know that that answer is yes. And that we are working to make more corners of this world like that. But that there have been Black people all across many lifetimes who have traveled, not because they were brought somewhere in chains, but because they got on a boat and said, I would love to see a new place. There have been explorers, there have been performers, there have been writers, there have been Black people doing and seeing beautiful things since the beginning of time. And we deserve to see that reflected at us. And not only Black people fighting tooth and nail to their last dying breath, because that also happens, but that's not the only way for us to live.
Thank you. Studies show that younger generations are reading less and growing increasingly more delusion with the status quo. How do you, as a relatively young author, hone your writing and messages to connect with those younger generations? What's the key?
Connecting with younger generations through my writing is very important because to me, I don't just write for it to look good on your bookshelf, for it to be something that you said, I got through this very hard material that no one else can read. I want to write something that can be widely understood. And that doesn't mean dumbing it down. I think that that's also to not give us enough credit, to not give young people enough credit. But I do think that you have to make it culturally relevant. You have to make people understand why, in a world where I have access to so much information at my fingertips, why should this take up space in my brain? right? Like, why do I need to know this and remember it? And what should I do about it? And I think that that's something that not a lot of writers are doing in their work. And that's also a training thing. You know, the pipeline of how writers and journalists and reporters are being trained is to be impartial, to be unbiased, to not put yourself in the story. And to me, that's just been impossible. That the stories that I want to tell are to free Black people. So if I leave you with questions of, well, devil's advocate, like, no. Let's be clear. My history is unequivocal in some instances, and I want people to read my work and say, oh wow, I know something new, and it didn't just depress me, it didn't just leave me frustrated, but it gave me something that I could do about it. And that action step is a big part of why I write and how I write. And it doesn't mean, you know, some people write for the more philosophical, to get you thinking differently, which is another important action. But I think we also live in a world where young people in particular are over inundated, overstimulated. And then it's like, okay, well, now I just have a brain full of fun facts. Like, awareness is not going to get us free, right? Awareness is a step to getting us free. But if you don't follow awareness with action, it's just, you're just a very smart bystander. And I don't think we need a world full of more bystanders. We need people willing to come up off the sidelines and throw a Hail Mary, or block something, or run to the yards. We need people willing to get into action and roll up their sleeves. And I think that when young people find writing that speaks to that hunger to leave the world better than we received it, we chase that. And I felt as though there's not been a shortage of people interested in wanting to do better.
Have you received any pushback from publishers as it relates to any of your content? We talked about book bannings and the removal of our history. If so, if you have, maybe share a little bit about that, and what was your response to it? How do you deal with it?
You know, publishing a book about Black people, Black issues is not for the light at heart. And I imagine there's a lot of pushback that my agent received that never made it to me, because those
Okay.
people just were not
Yeah.
good fits. And I'm grateful to have worked with someone who understood what we were trying to do and made sure that we only went after editors who we thought would get the vision. And so I am, you know, I had an unusual publishing experience in that my debut landed at a Black led publishing house, One World. The publishing home that my book was published through has also published all of Ta-Nehisi Coates' work, the
Mm,
1619 Project with Nicole Hannah Jones,
mm,
Ibram Kendi's work. So they are no strangers to publishing something that is a bit controversial. They just recently published The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And even in
yeah.
traditional media spaces, you would have thought he would have been embraced in, he was received in a very negative light. But that didn't come from the publisher. And I'm really grateful to be working with editors and marketing professionals and publicist professionals who were not afraid of me writing a book that talked about reparations, that talked about Black land ownership and bipartisanship and failed reconstruction and the responsibility of white America in fixing a lot of these historic wrongs. Like, I'm really grateful that I ended up with a editor named Nicole Counts, who had been through the line of fire with other books before and said, let's do this together. But you don't end up at a publisher like that without other people telling you no, or saying, I won't even consider this. And even since the Orange Man has been re-elected, I have definitely heard from my agent, like, hey, it's going to be harder for us to pitch things. I mean, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, but the publishing industry will skew more conservatively in the aftermath of this, because they're going to see that as America is endorsing they want more material like him. And I am just
Mm.
hopeful that I will be able to continue to write the material I want to write. And it may not be with, you know, all of the publishers in the world. It might have to be with the select few, and I'm okay with that, because I just am not here for diluting my words or my ancestors' message, because I firmly believe that they speak through me when I write. And who am I in the year 2024 and beyond to to speak in whispers about something that my ancestors fought for valiantly with their full chest. You know, the personal has always been very political for me and has really guided how I write and what I choose to write about. Though sitting in formal academic spaces has been really great for my own like personal academic journey, I've always believed that I didn't want to tell anyone else's story. And that there are so many things that I've lived and that my family has lived that I don't need to tell anyone else's story. Coming from a family, I am a sixth generation Black landowner, and my great 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 grandfather being that first person to buy land, to pass it on to his children and their children and their children, and it still make its way to me. And now me as a young mom, knowing that I'm going to pass something along that was thought of before I was even thought of, and that my
Mm.
children and their grandchildren will be able to benefit from something that has been intergenerational. That is the dream of so many of us. And unfortunately, we live in a society and in a country where less than 1% of US land is owned by Black people. And that was something that I just, when I heard that stat for the first time, I realized that this was a book that I wanted to write about. Tell the story of how my family is both a victim of that, having lost hundreds of acres over the course of the 20th century, but also a unicorn in that we still have something. It's been the site of weddings and funerals and repasts, and we just celebrated Thanksgiving together and convened and talked about how we keep this family land going. And I want other Black people to be encouraged by that. That land is your birthright. It is all of our birthright. There's enough for all of us. And that is something that our ancestors and that indigenous ancestors have always known. And so, with the respect and admiration that comes for this land's stewards, we can also be people who get to partake in the freedom that comes with it. Like, thinking of my grandfather as a little boy in North Carolina. And though the Jim Crow South was waging around him, though lynchings and all sorts of violence was waging around him, he still knew the feeling of running around an open field, laughing loudly, no one telling you to be quiet or keep your head down. Or that feeling is something we can still give to our kids. And it really does start with us caring about the land and buying a piece of it, buying the block, so to speak, but not just to develop it, but sometimes to just benefit from the ecotherapy that comes with being on land. So for those who are trying to find your place in that environmental justice, racial justice space, land is the perfect intersection and crossroads of it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
So,
Thank you.
thank
Thank you.
you. I
Thank you. Very,
appreciate you.
yeah.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the Our Culture, Our Stories podcast are those of the individual hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policies or positions of the NAACP or any affiliated organizations.